join Ben Fogle, who's exploring another historic rural castle. And this time, Ben is on the Scottish borders.
Meet Lord Maxwell. He's preparing for battle at his home in the Scottish borders. He's well prepared. Every part of his body is protected. But deep down he knows he's doomed. Over the hill, a force of thousands of English soldiers, led by Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots.
Oh, now this may look a little bit odd, but no, I haven't forgotten my shoe. This was the only way to wage war during medieval times, because my bare foot gets a greater grip on the soil so I can get a greater injury on my enemy.
This was the first of many such battles, as we'll find out.
Caerlaverock Castle stands guard over the Solway Firth at the gateway to Scotland. From its battlements you can see the Lakeland Fells, but it's that very proximity to England that has brought the castle into frequent conflicts throughout its existence. Let's take a tour around. The land was actually granted to the clan Maxwell in the 1220s. The first castle was built over there in the woods on very boggy ground. So it's not surprising then that this is in fact the second castle. It was built in the 1270s and completed just in time to be besieged by the English the first time. And that was in 1300.
In the year of grace 1300, on the day of St. John, Edward held a great court at Carlisle and commanded that in a short time all his men should prepare to go together with him against his enemies, the Scots.
So can you tell me about the first siege?
He set out with the English army and a complete siege train from Carlisle.
Of how many people?
Several thousand.
On the appointed day the whole host was ready, and the good king with his household then set forward against the Scots, and that they might not be taken by surprise, well and securely armed.
He had to hold out against the English to maintain his honour.
Then were seen such hurtling stones as caps and helms would pound to dust. Shatter shields and batter taves, kill and wound was now their lust, and great shouts arose whenever any damage was revealed.
He knew what Edward and his army were capable of, so he held out for a day. There was no chance of reinforcements. He had 60-odd men. Edward has several thousand, complete with artillery, trebuchets, stone throwers that could have pounded the castle to pieces. So he held out for a day to maintain his honour, and then he came and negotiated terms with Edward, because if he didn't, he realised he and the entire garrison would have probably been slaughtered.
They weren't all slaughtered, although some were hung from these walls. But that wasn't the end of it. There were sieges in 1312, 1570 and again in 1640. And politically the Maxwells didn't make life easy for themselves by changing allegiance between the feuding English and Scottish royal families.
Peace was finally restored in the mid-14th century and the castle rebuilt. It probably began to look a bit like it does today, but it wasn't actually completed until much later.
So much of what we see of the castle now is the work of the 15th century, where almost 100 years after the devastation of the Wars of Independence and the sieges, the investment was there again from the Maxwells to completely rebuild and enrich this entrance front, make it very grand and very impressive, especially with the recess here for the lifting bridge that came up, and you can see the slot where the cable for that lifting bridge came out, and then this wonderful enrichment with this triple corbelling and what's called machicolation, where people could actually fire down or drop boiling oil or whatever. It's here we're moving into the early 17th century, the time of the first Earl of Nithsdale, as the Maxwells became. And you start to get an idea of the grandeur and the nobility of this family.
The gatehouse is genuinely impressive, and behind it, buildings of a new era. These rooms were built in the 17th century, so apart from the outside wall, there's barely a remnant of the fortress that faced the Hammer of the Scots in the 1300s.
So how did the castle actually fall into disrepair?
Well, in 1640 there was another great siege by the Covenanters, and it was so devastating that the castle could not be repaired and could not be used again as a residence after that time.
And that's the way it's been left today?
That's right.
Now, one last question I want to ask about this. RB 1776.
Must be Robbie Burns, who's a native of this area who's buried just up the road in Dumfries.
And do you think he really could have inscribed that in 1776?
Robbie Burns certainly sounds romantic, but no one really knows for sure. Back to the last siege by the Covenanters. They were a radical Protestant reform movement outlawed by Charles I. Caerlaverock confronted their army with a garrison of 200, and this time held out for 13 weeks. When they finally surrendered, an inventory of the castle found 5 beds with silk counterpanes, 20 servants' beds and 40 carpets. Just some of the contents of a country house, not really a fortress.
And of course, inevitably, the castle was partially dismantled and left open to the elements and the visitors.
And Ben will be exploring another rural